Hello everyone, it's Brian here in Toronto, and I'm going to do a thread 2-for-1, twofer. So you can watch one or the other or both. I'll put a timing thing so you can skip to the other one if you like, but I thought I'd roll these together. The first one is for Mike Vinyl Spiral, who has just passed 300 subscribers. Very good. And his thread is show 5 artists that you love now but didn't initially. And there's so many, but I think there's a couple categories there. There's bands I thought I didn't like, or artists I thought I didn't like, because I never had taken the time to investigate them, just assumed I didn't like them. And then there's those bands that I heard and actively disliked them. So I've chosen from that group because that seems to be more on target with the thread. And so I'm going to start with one that was shown, an artist that was shown by Dale at Gatefold 33, a cool channel also across the pond there. And this might be a surprise, but for me, Bob Dylan. I had heard some of his tracks and just didn't appreciate it, didn't really like it. I'm not sure what the first track I heard was, but I remember hearing things like Blowing in the Wind and thought it was like a kind of a boring folk song. None of my friends listen to Bob Dylan. I have 3 older brothers and sisters. None of them listen to Bob Dylan. I was used to hearing like Led Zeppelin and Alice Cooper and things like that from my older brother and sisters. Sorry, brothers and sister, but never Bob Dylan. So it just didn't fit into any friend group or in any way. And every song I heard, I thought, well, I just didn't like it, which seems strange now because I have a lot of Bob Dylan records. But one day I was in a CD shop and I bought a copy of Highway 61 Revisited. And despite the fact that this has obviously like a Rolling Stone on it, I also didn't really love this. It sat on my shelf for months before I pulled it out again. I pulled it out again, listened to it, it's like, I don't know. But I went on a drive one day and I took this with me. I don't know why I took it. I thought I'd give it another chance. And it kind of clicked at that point. I'm not sure why. And then, of course, I acquired an entire shelf full of Bob Dylan CDs, and then a lot of vinyl. So I had quite a lot of vinyl too. So I don't really know why. I just had this instant dislike. I don't know whether it was the voice or the sound or something about it. I wasn't familiar with. I didn't know anyone who liked it, so it kind of just didn't appeal to me. And now I think that's kind of weird because he's a favorite of mine. I think he's a genius. Number 2 might be one that's a bit of a surprise because in my videos I've shown a lot of new wave and synth pop and that kind of thing. But for some reason, I took an instant dislike to Depeche Mode, and that lasted for a very long time. And I'm not sure why. It's just that when I think of the music I was listening to, this seemed a bit more, I hate to say juvenile, but maybe a little too fluffy in some ways. Like, just can't get enough. Just struck me as being kind of silly, and I didn't really get it. New Life, yeah. So I was momentarily interested in them at one point when I heard Blasphemous Rumors, because I thought that was kind of interesting. Master and Servant I thought was kind of interesting, but not interesting enough for me to actually buy the records. And I didn't own any Depeche Mode records for, I don't know, 35 years, maybe even longer than that. And now I pretty much have, I'm only missing a couple of the later ones. And I think it may be around the time of Music for the Masses or Black Celebration that I began to think differently about them. It's funny because a friend of mine went to see them and said something like, the entire audience was made up of teenagers. And that's how I kind of thought of them, as a band for teenagers. So, yeah, they kind of appeal to me more now. And even this record I think is better than I thought it was at the time. So, yeah, Depeche Mode. So number 3 is Prince. So I didn't even have any awareness of Prince until probably, I don't know, was it Purple Rain? Probably the first time I heard his songs on MTV, or not MTV, in Canada we had much music, and it struck me as being highly polished, highly commercial, and you saw the videos so often that I was like, I didn't really get it. But at some point I think I realized, and I don't know when it happened, that I just sort of clued into what his guitar playing and realized that he was a fantastic guitar player. Like, I was really surprised when I really stopped to listen to his guitar playing. I thought it was pretty amazing. And yeah, it's up and down. Some of this, I don't love everything he's done, but I actually respect him as an artist. Although I kind of lost track, like as the '90s rolled in, when he changed his name and I kind of lost track then. I don't know much about that stuff, but the early few records, Sign of the Times, 1999, that kind of thing, I think are really good. And it's weird to me to say that, knowing that I actually disliked him, and my friends disliked him too. Like he was kind of laughed at, but I thought I think he's actually quite amazing. This will be similar to the second one I showed because, again, we're back to the sort of new wave thing. But I actually disliked intensely Duran Duran when I first heard them. It's again, don't know why. Like it just seemed uninspired to me. Like Planet Earth seemed a bit boring. But I will say that the video, the uncensored video for Girls on Film, really captivated my attention the first time I saw it. Is there something I should know? Again, just didn't really work for me. I think when I heard Hungry Like the Wolf, I sort of appreciated that more, and I liked the video. And as time went on, I kind of developed I wouldn't say this is a band I love, but I do appreciate them and I like them. Funnily enough, one of my friends thought that the song Wild Boys, they were singing Choir Boys, which always makes me laugh. But hated them initially. They're okay now. I actually quite like them, but with some reservations. But I think that's a big change. And lastly, a band that gets a lot of love and a lot of hate at the same time, and I was a person who really hated them initially, and that is Steely Dan. And when you think of this record, like Do It Again, Dirty Work, Reelin' in the Years, kind of staples of classic rock radio, and that wasn't really my scene at some points in my life. But so I kind of wrote them off, and then I didn't pay any attention to them, but I bought a copy of Asia at some point, and when I played it, I again didn't like it. I knew Peg, of course. I just didn't really get it, but a friend of mine really loved them. He lent me a copy of The Night Fly by Donald Fagen, which I liked more. But going back and reviewing the albums, and I took a history of rock music course at some point, and they were featured quite a lot, I sort of began to understand what was going on, and I do think they're actually quite good. Now, I know people hate them. I know people who watch this channel hate them, and that's totally fine, but it's kind of surprising to me because I never thought I would like them, but it turns out that, hey, they're actually not bad. So this is part one, and I will switch now to part two. All right, welcome back. This is Brian again with part two of the twofer in threads. This is for Rod, Happy Hippie, the vinyl guy, who made an impassioned plea for people to spell peace with records or CDs in this weird time we have in the world right now. So here we go. I started with Platinum Blonde for P. This is a Canadian-ish new wave band. I guess you'd call them new wave. Maybe fringing on, well, not hair metal, but they have the look of it anyway. The one guy was originally from the UK. Anyway, I chose this because the title track, Standing in the Dark, actually makes explicit reference to war. It talks about DEFCON 5 and, talking about taking no prisoners, but you drop that bomb and there'll be no prisoners. So maybe a nuclear war statement. It seems to be a song about peace. And then E, Echo and the Bunnymen. This is their self-titled record. And I chose this because there's a track on here called Bombers Bay, which has themes of war and oppression and that kind of thing. And it talks about cannon fire and on the road to Mandalay. It talks about Berlin, Bombers Bay. So that seems to be a song in that theme. And then the third one for A, Atoms for Peace, which is a kind of a super group. It had Tom York from Radiohead, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and some other people as well. Now, Atoms for Peace, this is called Amok, by the way. Atoms for Peace was a kind of like an initiative by Eisenhower. I'm not an American historian or anything, but not a historian at all. But Atoms for Peace being a program to encourage proliferation of nuclear weapons, but at the same time it was criticized because it seemed to be allow the American military to build up a lot of nuclear weapons. So an interesting record and interesting name, Atoms for Peace being something that led to more nuclear weapons, which is kind of funny. For C, we have Leonard Cohen, and I chose this record because there's a track on here called The Story of Isaac, which appears on a previous record, but it was performed in 1972, and I think you could read this as a anti-Vietnam War track. In the original recording of it, there's no context. It's like a biblical story that's put to music. But in this particular case, when he introduces it, he talks about one generation who would sacrifice their children for the sake of another. So I think it's clear he was talking about the Vietnam War. So obviously an anti-war song. And lastly, another Canadian band. Well, there's the L there is an article, so I'm going to ignore it. It's L'étranger, but it's E, running out of Funtown. This band's an early Canadian punkish sort of band, known because it had Andrew Cash and Charlie Angus, who both became members of Parliament. In Canada, I think Charlie Angus still is, Andrew Cash is not, but it has a couple of songs that are interesting. One is called One People, which is kind of like a plea to stop fighting. It talks about the Boer War going back, but he talks about like the divisions and that kind of thing, and Indigenous people, that kind of topic. And then the last one is War Zone, which talks about movies, but I think it goes beyond that to the idea that we are so fixated on modern amenities and the royal family and fashion that we don't think about war, like what's happening in the war zone. So that's kind of an interesting record, and that spells peace. So thanks for watching these two threads combined, and I'll talk to you next time.